A single drop of ink, silent, discreet. It falls into a glass of clear water and within seconds transforms everything. Transparency vanishes, clarity dissolves, but the drop is no longer seen. This is the perfect image of what happens when something subtle profoundly changes the way we perceive the world. It's not the world that changes, it's the gaze, and with it, everything begins to dance. When you change the way you look at things, all of reality dances in response. This phrase isn't just beautiful, it's a key, because there is an exact point in consciousness where reality stops being just a backdrop and becomes a response. That point is your gaze. Have you noticed how some situations keep repeating in your life, even after so many external changes? You move to a new city, change relationships, change jobs, but inside, something remains the same. A certain silent pattern that insists on returning. It's not bad luck, nor destiny. It's simply the reflection of the lens through which you keep looking. What you're about to discover is not a motivational theory. It's a silent yet radical reconfiguration of the way you exist in the world. Because true transformation doesn't begin with grand actions but with small corrections in the way you observe. Get ready to see the world with new eyes, because maybe what's missing in your life isn't outside of you. It's in the way you see. Imagine that inside your brain, there's a silent little guardian, a selective filter that decides every second what you should notice in the world around you. This guardian has a name, Reticular Activating System, or RAS. It acts like a neurological doorman, allowing only a fraction of the information you constantly receive to enter the hall of your consciousness. While your brain processes about 400 billion bits per second, your conscious mind can only handle around 2,000. This means you're never seeing everything. You're only seeing what your mind already considers important. And what does it consider important? What you frequently observe? What you believe to be true? What resonates with your most constant thoughts? Science calls this attentional focus. Spirituality calls it vibration. But both say the same thing. What you see is what you're trained to perceive, and what you perceive gradually becomes the shape of your reality. This connection between observation and reality becomes even deeper when we go beyond classical physics and step into the quantum realm. In the famous double-slit experiment, subatomic particles like electrons behave differently when observed. Without observation, they act like waves, infinite possibilities. But the moment someone observes them, they collapse into particles, a single reality. It's as if the universe silently asks, "What are you choosing to see right now?" This unsettling phenomenon revealed a profound truth. The mere act of observation alters the behavior of matter. Consciousness, therefore, is not just a spectator of the universe, but an active participant in its construction. This brings us to a new worldview, one where the observer and the observed are entangled in a dance of meaning and possibility. Here, modern science meets ancient wisdom. David Bohm, a theoretical physicist and contemporary of Einstein, proposed that reality is not made of isolated parts, but of a continuous flow of information called the hollow movement. In this model, everything is interconnected, and what we see as manifest reality, explicit order, is just the tip of the iceberg. The true essence of things, according to Bohm, lies hidden in the implicate order, a subtle plane where consciousness and matter are woven from the same fabric. This implicate order can be compared to the quantum field of infinite possibilities. What rises to the surface, your everyday reality, depends on how you focus your attention into this invisible field. And this leads us to the quantum-like qualia hypothesis, published in Frontiers in Psychology. The central idea is that human consciousness, being inseparable from the physical world, operates similarly to quantum systems. Your internal experiences change as they are observed and interpreted. This means your thoughts, emotions, and perceptions are not static events inside an isolated brain. They are patterns of vibration, constantly reorganized by the way you choose to relate to them. When you focus on an idea, you're not just seeing that idea. You are creating a specific version of it, influenced by your emotional state, your beliefs, your personal history. Picture your mind as a deep lake. Each thought is a stone thrown onto its surface. The ripples that form are not just internal reactions, they are reverberations that, on a more subtle level, shape the fields of possibility around you. This is why two people, living the same external situation, can have completely different experiences. One sees chaos, the other sees opportunity. One sees an end, the other a beginning. What changes is not objective reality, it's the point of observation. And that point is constantly shifting, guided by a neural system shaped by everything you've ever believed to be true. Neuroplasticity, in turn, proves that the brain is not a rigid machine. It rebuilds, reorganizes, and reshapes itself according to the paths you walk most often. Recurring thoughts create trails, frequent emotions reinforce those routes, and the RAS, your inner guardian, adjusts the filters to prioritize everything that aligns with that vibrational pattern. This is why shifting your focus is more powerful than it seems. By observing differently, you teach your brain to reconnect synapses, to recalibrate emotions, to make room for frequencies that were previously off your radar. You're not just thinking differently. You are literally creating new perceptual pathways that, over time, change how reality presents itself to you. Maybe the universe was never static. Maybe it's a constantly vibrating network, silently waiting for the quality of your gaze to decide what form it should take. Imagine a crystal-clear lake. Its surface is so calm, it perfectly reflects the sky. Clouds drift by, trees lean over the shore, and the reflection returns everything like a silent mirror. This lake is your consciousness. Now picture what happens when a stone is thrown into this calm water. The image distorts, the shapes lose clarity, the reflection breaks into waves. What was once transparency becomes movement. This impact happens every time you feed a thought charged with emotion or expectation. Each idea you cast into the lake of your mind creates ripples that echo in your perception, and as a result, in the world you interpret as reality. But there's something even more subtle here. It's not just the thought that matters, it's how you observe it. If the stone falls gently, the ripples fade quickly. If the drop is abrupt, the turbulence lasts longer. The quality of your gaze determines the depth of the impact. This metaphor reveals a secret few notice. The reality you live is not the water itself, but the reflection distorted by the waves you create. Every judgment, every worry, every silent belief acts like a stone tossed without awareness. And the most curious part is that, over time, you start to believe that the distorted reflection is the true image. How many times have you reacted to a situation that seemed unfair, only to realize later that you interpreted everything through an emotional filter? How often have you projected onto others an intention that actually came from your own unresolved expectation? This happens because we forget to look at the water before throwing the stone. The inner lake, this living mirror, has its own language. It responds to focus. The more you observe the same thoughts, the denser the waves become. What was once a simple belief becomes a pattern. What was a fleeting fear becomes a permanent lens. And so the external world seems to confirm everything you were already expecting to see. But here's the turning point. If you change the type of stone you throw, or better yet, if you learn to observe before reacting, the reflection also changes. And with it, your entire way of relating to life. It's not about controlling thoughts, nor eliminating emotions. It's about recognizing that there is a space between what happens and what you choose to cast onto the surface of your mind. That space is your freedom. That's where the power to reorganize your reality resides. In that pause, you can ask yourself, do the ripples I'm about to create reflect what I truly want to see in the world? There's a transformative practice that starts with a simple question. What stones do I usually throw every day? In other words, what are the thoughts that most often repeat silently inside you? What do you believe about money, about love, about your own capability? And how do those beliefs, though invisible, shape the form of the waves disturbing your inner lake? For just one single day, just one, commit to observing your inner stones. Notice how you feel when you wake up, what thoughts arise spontaneously when something goes wrong, how you interpret others' silences, delays, challenges. Don't try to change anything, just observe. Write it down if you can. Make a map of your emotional reflection. This intimate cartography reveals more about your reality than any external effort, because what you see outside is merely a consequence of what echoes inside. If your waves are judgmental, you'll see a hostile world. If they're based in lack, you'll see scarcity everywhere. But if you begin to cast presence, acceptance, conscious attention, even in small doses, the reflection changes. Life begins to return gentleness. It's like wiping a mirror covered in splashes. What once looked deformed begins to gain clarity, not because the world changed, but because your way of seeing finally became clearer. And in the serene reflection of your own consciousness, you begin to recognize the truth. You were always the one responsible for the image you saw. This is the most invisible and most powerful practice, because no one sees when you decide to throw a new stone. No one hears when you choose silence over reaction, but the water feels it. Reality responds, and the world, like a mirror, reshapes its contours to reflect what you're willing to see with new eyes. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when desire turns into absence, an instant in which what you want, when observed through a lens of lack, begins to flee from you like a moving reflection, and no matter how close you get, it seems the universe always steps back one pace ahead. This is the paradox that many fail to notice. By desiring something intensely, you may unknowingly be vibrating the very feeling of its absence. When your gaze fixates on what is not yet present, reality responds with more absence. It's like trying to fill a glass with open hands. The more you try to hold it, the more it slips through your fingers. The root of this lies in a mechanism known in psychology as apperception, the mind's tendency to reinterpret everything it receives based on pre-established beliefs. The brain doesn't just perceive, it shapes perception according to what it believes. In other words, it's not the world telling you what is missing. It's you who sees the lack and the world merely confirms it. Imagine someone who wants to attract prosperity. They repeat affirmations, make plans, visualize their goals, but internally, each phrase carries a hidden subtext. I don't have this yet. The focus, though disguised as optimism, is rooted in scarcity. And what manifests? More signs of lack. This happens because the universe does not respond to what you say. It responds to what you vibrate. And vibration is determined not by the rational content of your desire, but by the emotion that sustains it. You may claim to believe in abundance, but if you observe the world with fear, your frequency is still broadcasting absence, and that's what gets reflected back. The mind, in this context, works like a distorted mirror. It seeks out, interprets, and amplifies everything that confirms its unconscious expectations. If you believe life is hard, you will, even without meaning to, filter experiences to prove that point. If you expect rejection, you'll tend to see contempt in silence, coldness in neutrality, indifference in mere distraction. Perception becomes addicted to finding evidence of pain. This cycle is fed by the type of attention you offer reality. Attention is a magnifying lens. The more you focus on a problem, the more details you see. Not because the problem grew, but because your mind zoomed in, and in doing so it stopped seeing the rest of the field. The same goes for desire. When observed through the lens of absence, it turns into frustration, and frustration becomes the new focal point. It's like trying to walk forward while looking backwards. The effort is real, but the direction is reversed. This pattern is so common that many manifestation practices end up becoming traps. Not out of bad intent, but due to a lack of vibrational understanding. The person lights candles, performs rituals, writes down goals, but their field remains charged with anxiety, doubt, tense expectation, and the energy that comes to them is not from what they asked for. It's from what they emitted. The secret is not in wishing harder, but in observing more lightly. Instead of looking at what is missing, shift the focus to what is already pulsing as a present seed. Because wherever your attention rests, your reality begins to bloom. If you desire love but only notice where it's absent, your vibration communicates loneliness. If you seek growth but only see obstacles, your energy anchors in limitation. The key is to shift your gaze, not to deny current reality but to widen the field. What you focus on flourishes. What you ignore withers. What you observe with fear contracts. What you observe with trust expands. There's a breaking point where everything can change, and that point isn't in an achievement or external event. It's in the shift of the lens. In the moment you stop looking for signs of absence and begin noticing signs of emergence, of what is already being born, even if still invisible. Then reality reorganizes. After all, the universe doesn't act through coercion or bargaining. It dances with the quality of your attention. And if your gaze becomes a sincere invitation, not to control but to allow, then what once seemed distant starts to come closer, not because something changed outside, but because finally, something aligned within. Clara had grown up hearing that she needed to be strong, that she couldn't show weakness, that she shouldn't trust too much, that the world wasn't a safe place. Her childhood, though seemingly normal, was marked by long silences, by looks that said more than words, by small absences that left deep marks. And even as an adult, even after studying, working, and seeking help, everything still seemed to revolve around one same feeling. Something was always missing. She tried everything: therapy, meditation, gratitude lists, self-awareness courses. But one question echoed within her, silent and insistent. Why does life still feel so heavy even when everything seems to be right? That's when something unusual happened. During a trip, Clara decided to visit a remote village, far from the noise of the world. There she met an old man who lived alone in a simple hut, surrounded by books, stones, and wooden instruments. He spoke little, but his eyes held a depth that didn't match his frail appearance. Clara, feeling strangely at ease, opened up. She shared her efforts, her healing attempts, her tireless search for answers. He listened silently, and in the end, he asked only one question. Have you ever changed the way you look at what you believe needs to be changed? At first, the question seemed vague, but something in it touched her. That night, alone, Clara began to think. She had always tried to fix her story, but always looked at it as something broken. She had always wanted to be free from the pain, but still observed it with fear as if it were a lurking enemy. What if the problem wasn't the pain, but the way she saw it? In the following days, Clara decided to conduct a silent experiment. Instead of reliving her traumas with guilt, she began to observe them as someone watching a play. Each memory was a scene, each emotion a character, and for the first time, she didn't try to fix anything. She just watched. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" she began to ask, "What did this teach me about myself?" She noticed that behind the rigidity was a little girl who only wanted to feel protected, that behind the distrust was a soul that once trusted too much, that behind the fear there was strength, yes, strength, from someone who kept going even when she wanted to stop. Gradually, something began to shift, not in the world outside, but in the way Clara felt it. Situations that once felt heavy began to seem neutral. Small gestures, once overlooked, became invitations to presence. Anger gave way to tenderness, rigidity to curiosity, and the emptiness, which once hurt, now felt like a space to be filled with new choices. Clara realized she was never a prisoner of her circumstances, but of the lens through which she interpreted everything, and that lens now was clean. One morning, looking at her reflection in the window fogged by the cold, Clara smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time she saw herself without old filters, not as someone broken trying to fix herself, but as fertile ground where the right seeds, those planted with presence not haste, could finally grow. She didn't need to change careers, nor start a new life in another country. The most radical transformation she experienced was invisible to others, but absolute within, because the world remained the same. But Clara now saw it differently, and that was enough. This story, though personal, reveals a universal truth. The reality that most imprisons us is rarely found in situations, but in the meanings we assign to them. When we look at our pain as a sentence, it suffocates us. But when we observe it as a symbol, as part of a larger storyline, it stops defining us and begins to teach us. Change doesn't always require a big action. Sometimes it begins when you stop fighting what you feel and begin listening to what lies beneath. Because behind every repetition, there is an unheard plea, and behind every pattern, a still living lesson. Clara learned to listen, and in listening, she rediscovered her clarity. Perhaps this is the beginning of all true transformation. Not changing what we feel, but relearning how to see. What truly changes a life is not what is intellectually known, but what is silently lived every day. And what most influences that experience is what you choose to observe, not occasionally, but as a habit. Attention, when cultivated with intention, becomes a creative force. But when left to chance, it turns into noise that sustains old patterns. There is a subtle difference between looking and perceiving, Looking is a mechanical act. Perceiving is a vibrational choice. The intention is not to monitor every thought rigidly, but to open an inner space where consciousness becomes more present, more clear, more alive. And this begins with simple yet powerful practices. Imagine a meditation that does not aim to calm the mind, but simply to reveal what it insists on hiding. Sit down, close your eyes, and allow yourself to feel what is emerging, not what is missing. Instead of seeking answers or wishing for solutions, just be with what arises. Observe what it's like to be present without the demand to fix anything. You are not there to silence the thoughts, but to listen to what pulses behind them. When fear arises, observe. When urgency tries to intrude, observe. When emptiness shows itself, feel it with respect. Something shifts when you stop resisting. This exercise is not about forced focus, but about allowing the emergence of what is alive. Because when you stop observing from lack, you begin to perceive what has always been blossoming, even in silence. Throughout the day, another gesture can become alchemical, recording the small signs of change. Not the big deeds or evident achievements, but the invisible details that used to go unnoticed. The smile you managed to hold even in the face of tension. The decision to breathe before reacting. The intuition that came without warning. The moment you realized something hurt, but didn't hurt as much as before. Writing down these fragments, even in just a few lines, is like planting seeds in the soil of consciousness. And over time, these seeds grow roots. They remind you that transformation is not measured in leaps, but in subtleties repeated with intention. In the midst of this practice, certain questions can act as portals. Questions that don't require an immediate answer, but open space for the answer to reveal itself silently, in everyday experience. Questions that don't pressure, but guide. Ask yourself, for example, what is my attention making blossom? Notice how this question doesn't point outward, but inward. It doesn't demand, but illuminates. Another question that transforms the vibrational field is, where am I placing my focus? On the emptiness or on the fertile field? This reflection is not about denying pain or embracing positive illusion. On the contrary, it invites lucidity, because there's a vast difference between seeing reality as a desert and recognizing it as uncultivated soil. The same land can be interpreted as abandonment or as potential, depending on the gaze. These questions are like clean mirrors. They reflect your image without distortion and reveal what your eyes had become used to ignoring. Because often what's missing is not a new answer, but a new willingness to listen to what is already present. The key lies in stepping out of perceptual autopilot and returning to presence, being with life instead of merely reacting to it, feeling the moment as it is, without the rush to mold it, and gradually noticing that reality begins to return what you are willing to sustain internally. You don't need to be perfect, nor be in an elevated state all the time. Just a sincere gaze is enough, a simple choice made many times to observe with kindness, to witness instead of judge, and to allow life to reveal its dance when you move with it, not against it, because that's where the magic happens, not in complex rituals, nor in affirmations repeated without soul, but in the moment you realize that your attention is an offering, and everything you offer, the universe responds to. So observe then with an open heart, and you will see, not as someone seeking proof, but as one becoming part of the answer, that even what once seemed invisible begins to reveal itself. Reality is not a fixed structure, it is a vibrational score. Each gaze you cast upon the world writes a note in this invisible melody. If you observe with fear, it contracts. If you look with soul, it expands. Nothing changes out there while your focus continues pointing to the same places within. Transformation doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with a small realignment of the gaze. When you change the way you see, what once was a stone becomes a portal. What seemed like absence reveals a seed, and what once hurt, now teaches. Life is waiting for your next movement of attention, and if you've made it this far, leave in the comments. My gaze creates the world that gazes back at me. That way I'll know you watched until the end, and that something inside you has already begun to see differently.